Hi everyone! Welcome to the Real Estate Red Zone, brought to you by the Real Estate Center at Texas A&M University. I'm Haley Reeder, Communications Specialist. Today is Wednesday, August 12th, 2020. On this day in 1983, a sinkhole about 250 feet in diameter and 25 feet deep formed suddenly over the crest of the Bowling Dome, collapsing the roadway that ran alongside it. The Bowling Dome is a 55-acre underground rock structure that contains petroleum, sulfur, and salt. It lays on the western bank of the San Bernard River, about 3 miles north of Bowling, Iago in Wharton County, southwest of Houston. Over 8,000 wells had been drilled to mine the sulfur reserve, and 12,000 more for oil and gas, producing a highly porous zone that affects the integrity of the dome. In addition to the 1983 sinkhole, several others have occurred over the Bowling Dome, a condition that is becoming common at other salt dome sites where sulfur and oil are produced. Now on to today's podcast. The COVID-19 health crisis impacted the Texas and U.S. economies in big ways. Texas was hit with a double whammy when oil prices plummeted in late April. The size of the economic shock will likely result in losses that overshadow those from the 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. Recently released second quarter numbers from the Real Estate Center show the Texas land market was hit hard by both oil prices and the pandemic. Center Research Economist Dr. Gilliland presented the findings in a Facebook livestream last week. If you missed the presentation, you can find the video on Facebook and on YouTube. We included a link to the video as well as his PowerPoint slides on our podcast webpage. Dr. Gilliland took a moment to join us on today's podcast to give more insight on how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted Texas rural land markets. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
How did the COVID-19 pandemic impact the Texas land market?
Probably the most noticeable impact on a statewide basis was a drop in the total dollar volume. A year ago, in 2019, the annualized dollar volume was $1.4 billion that were involved in transactions in the Texas land market. This year, in the second quarter, that fell to 1.1 billion. The reduction was basically $336 million in transactions that didn't take place in the second quarter of this year compared with last year. The next place that it impacted things was there was only a 1%, 1.7%, or about a 2% increase in price statewide from that total dollar volume drop of 22%. So the big impact was transactions didn't happen as often as they would have in the past. And that had some impact on prices. But the experience was not universal across the state. The impact seemed to be worse or more noticeable in West Texas than in the rest of the state. That's essentially how it impacted the market. It impacted it by reducing the number of transactions that occurred, and having some negative impact on prices in particular areas.
Overall, how did the Texas land market fare in second quarter 2020?
Well, given the fact that we had a historic reduction in economic activity as measured by changes in the gross domestic product, it was real blow to the general economy. And given that kind of a blow, which has not been matched by any downturn where they've been keeping records, I would say that the Texas land market fared fairly well, even though the total dollar volume did drop 22% and the number of acres that were sold dropped about 24%. The price still increased 1.7% overall. So that's, in my mind, kind of an amazing set of statistics, given how really impactful the COVID virus was on the economic activity.
Which Texas land market regions came out of the pandemic and oil downturn relatively unscathed? Which ones suffered the most?
Well, probably the one that seems to have weathered the storm as well as any is the Austin-Waco-Hill Country, Central Texas area. And the price there went up 1.5%, but the total dollar volume also went up almost 1%. The total acres that changed hands was almost the same. So essentially, there was not much of an impact in terms of reducing the volume of activity. Now, the one that seemed to fare the best was the West Texas land market, from up around Wichita Falls down toward the border through Abilene. That area had strong price increase, and that drove a dollar volume increase there as well. But the acres were off 5%. So it was in that area, probably reflected the fact that more high quality properties sold than usual. But there was a pretty strong performance in terms of price and total dollar volume, but the sales volume, the number of sales were off 12, almost 13%. So it was sort of a mixed performance, but the price increase was pretty remarkable. Northeast Texas also managed to post a 5% price increase but again, we're looking at total dollar volume retreating almost 12%, total acres down almost 16%. So the sales volume, the number of sales was down 11%. So there were a lot fewer transactions, but the price held steady in that area. And the same was true with the Gulf Coast and Brazos Bottom. It was a smaller price increase, 3.9%, but also a smaller sales volume drop of 7%. So I would say that the West Texas, Northeast Texas, and Gulf Coast and Austin-Waco-Hill Country were weathering the storm pretty well. The Panhandle and South Plains was kind of a different story. The price there was off almost 6%. Sales volume was down almost 17%, and their total dollar volume was off 22%, roughly. So that looks like maybe the virus took a little toll on that particular region. But the one that really probably suffered the most was far West Texas, out in the Trans-Pecos country. A lot of the land market activity out there for the past several years has centered on industrial activity, as the Permian Basin boom had inspired a lot of sales out there for various uses, producing the oil and gas out in that area. When the oil price collapsed and the COVID virus also hit, it probably was more the oil price collapse than anything. Activity came to a screeching halt out there, and prices stunk back from what the oil patch people were paying to something that's more reflective of normal prices out in that area, which represented almost a 50% decline in the overall price. But the rest of the story was that the total activity was off more than 60%, which should cast some doubt on the validity of that price indicator. It essentially the market came to a screeching halt, if you will, out there in the second quarter. And the South Texas area experienced a price increase. That's the area from San Antonio south to the border of 2%. The sales volume was off about 30%, and the total dollar volume was off about 17%. So although the prices were hanging in there, the rest of the market looked a little bit weak. So that's kind of the snapshot of what happened all around the state.
What should we expect for the second half of the year?
That is an extremely good question. And it all depends on, in my mind, what happens with the COVID virus. People had assumed, I think, back in March and April, that by this time we would have it under control, or it would have kind of gone away for the summer, and things would be picking up and looking better. As we all know now, that has not happened, and we are still in the grip of the pandemic, and people are still worried about their exposing themselves to the virus. So there is real reduction in economic activity that persists even when the authorities allow activity to pick up. People simply are not showing up at the restaurants like they used to, and not showing up at their gymnasiums and things like that. So what happens over the rest of the year, I think, depends greatly on what happens with the coronavirus. If we can get it kind of under control, so it's manageable, and or we get an effective vaccine, then things may perk up. Otherwise, we may be in for a long haul with this. Brokers that I have spoken with have indicated that there's a lot of interest in rural land. So there have been a lot of calls. People are basically thinking about relocating away from the municipal areas out into the countryside. And so we'll just have to keep our eyes on the market developments to see how that plays out. It could well inspire an uptick in activity as well as prices. So my answer for what's going to happen in the second half is we need to stay tuned and see what's going to happen, because it depends greatly on what happens with the virus.
Thanks again for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks again, Charles. For more on this, don't forget to check out his full presentation. The center also just released a report that analyzes Texas land markets segmented by size for 6 of Texas' 7 land market regions. Read Structural Trends of Regional Texas Rural Land Markets, a report by Dr. Gilliland and research interns Tian Su and Shelby Greaves. We included a link to that, as well as the center's latest land data, on our podcast webpage and in the YouTube description box. For more coronavirus-related information, check out the center's weekly economic indicator. This tool can help forecast changes in the Texas economy resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. We included a link to that publication down below, and don't forget to subscribe to email notifications so you always know when the indicator is updated. The Real Estate Center has more COVID-19 related podcasts. Recently, we sat down with Center Chief Economist Dr. Jim Gaines and Research Economist Dr. Luis Torres to discuss how the pandemic affected Texas' housing market and general economy. To stay up to date when new podcasts are released, subscribe on iTunes or subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon to receive video notifications. All podcasts are also available for free on our website. We also included a link to the center's latest COVID-19 related news items. You can read those items in our News Talk Texas database, as well as Recon, our bi-weekly newsletter. Sign up for free at the link below. That's going to be it for today's podcast. If you want more from the Real Estate Center, head to our website. That's www.recenter.tamu.edu. There, you'll find the latest data, research articles, blogs, news, and more. The latest items in our research library include representative interest rates for Texas mortgagees, interest rate movement, housing affordability, quarterly commercial and apartment data, and more. To stay up to date on when articles are published on our website, follow the Real Estate Center on social media. You can find us with the handle at RECenterTX on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. For more podcasts like these, you can subscribe on iTunes or to our YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us today in the Real Estate Red Zone, brought to you by the Real Estate Center in College Station, Texas, where we've been helping Texans make the best real estate decisions since 1971. This is Haley Reeder, and I'll see you next time. Bye!